For those that may not know me, I'm a Zambian, and as I woke up today, I began to ask myself, looking at the way the economy in Zambia is, the way things are, and I decided to create this content because of a number of friends who began to ask me to say, okay, we're about to finish school, but then is it safe to come back in Zambia? Because we're understanding load shedding and a number of things that are happening, high cost of living, inflation. In other words, there's some kind of economic crisis. So I began to sit down, and as usual, I am a lover of history. I began to love history, and to be specific, history based on the Bible. Okay, so understanding where Zambia is coming from, just like most African countries, is coming from a state of basically slavery, or rather colonization. So I began to read in the Bible, the story of the Israelites who are in a similar case like today modern day slavery. They were in slavery and they were rescued by Moses and things like that. So I began to understand, because as I was reading the Bible, there is a certain tribe that seems to come out as a strong tribe. It wasn't a big one, but is considered as a very, very important tribe, and that is the tribe of Issachar. Now, this tribe is a special one because when we read in 1 Chronicles 12, verse 31, it reads from Issachar. So we understand that basically should be David was choosing people to put in his army, and he was choosing from the 12 tribes of Israel, and one of the tribes was Issachar. So 1 Chronicles 12 verse 31, it reads, from Issachar, men who understood times and knew what Israel should do, 200 chiefs with all their relatives under their command. So those were the people who were chosen. And the special thing about this tribe of Issachar is their ability to understand the time. In other words, they had ability to discern the times, which is very important. And the question I have today, everyone watching this video, the question is simple. Do you understand the times we're living in? Do you understand the times we're living in? It is a very, very important question that each one of us should try to answer, because if we answer this question, then we'll never be lost. So, as usual, I started to understand the story of the Israelites, and what blew my mind was the understanding that God is really interested in transformation. Whenever God moves people from a state of slavery to a state of freedom, He wants people to change their mind. And this is why when you read the story of the Israelites being freed, all the people that experienced slavery were killed apart from Caleb and Joshua, including Moses was killed. Why? Because most of the Israelites who faced slavery in Egypt didn't change their mind. Even as they were moving, they were thinking, why is God bringing us to a place where we'll be killed by swords? It's better we find a leader who will take us back to Egypt. In other words, they were delivered, but their mind wasn't free. What am I simply trying to put across? I'm simply trying to put across that there is a difference between being delivered from slavery and freedom. And I've begun to understand that most of the people we consider today as freedom fighters, they are not really freedom fighters, they are simply deliverers. Deliverance is simply being rescued from physical chains, being rescued from physical bondage. Freedom is a mental thing. Freedom is a mental thing. What is your mind thinking? That is what freedom is really. So basically, all the people we consider as freedom fighters, for example, Kenneth Kaunda, those are not freedom fighters. They are simply delivered us. They rescued us from physical bondage from the oppressors. We are now in a different phase, which is a phase of freedom. And it is a very tough phase. Freedom is a very, very difficult phase. And we'll understand this as we read further. So let us read now what God says about our attitude as we are heading to freedom. What is our attitude? We must understand this, because if we understand this, we'll stop complaining. Because what I've noticed that in Zambia, most of us are not free. Our mind is still in slavery. And we understand what God did to the Israelites because of their mind not being changed. They wanted freedom, but their mind wasn't free to forget about the physical chains. God wanted to take them into a freedom, into a land of freedom, the promised land, but their mentality really didn't change. And that is why I had to kill the entire generation and only allowed Caleb and Joshua, together with the new descendants after 40 years, to then cross into the promised land. It has read Numbers 13 verse 1 to 3. The Bible reads, "The Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." Ancestral tribes, there were 12. So basically, God wanted 12 representatives from each tribe to go and explore the land of Canaan. Numbers 13 verse 13. Then Caleb, okay, before this verse, so when they went into the land of Canaan, they then came, and each of those tribes had to give their observation based on what they saw in the land. And these other tribes, some said, the people, we can't defeat the people. They are stronger than us. Okay? They are stronger than us. We can't defeat them. We are powerless. And basically, it brought a lot of tension. And this is why the Israelites began to complain, to say, why are you bringing us in a land where we die of sweats? Let us find a person who will take us back to Egypt. It is because of the report that people who went to Canaan brought back. Okay? So among the people that went, there was one, Joshua, Caleb, and the other 12. But these two are special. Now, let us hear the feedback of Caleb. Numbers 13 verse 30. The Bible reads, "Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Different attitude. Different attitude. God is interested in the attitude. As you are going in land of freedom, what is your attitude? It is very important. And let us see now what happened to Caleb because of him having a different attitude as he was going into the land of freedom. What was his attitude? Let us read Numbers 14 verse 24. And God said, "But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit," this is spirit with small s, which means attitude. Whenever the Bible uses spirit, which is in capital letters, it simply means the Holy Spirit. But when the Bible is using spirit with a small letter, you should translate it as modern day attitude. So Numbers 14 verse 24 says, "But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit or has a different attitude and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendant will inherit it." This is why Caleb was rescued. One, his attitude towards freedom changed. He changed his mind. He thought nothing is impossible. They can do it. And that is why God allowed him to see the promised land. Let us look at what happened to the bad reporters, which means the other 10 tribes which gave bad reports. Numbers 14, verse 7 to 38 reads, "These men who were responsible for spreading the bad report about the land were struck down and died of plague before the Lord." 38. Of the men who went to explore the land, only Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, survived. So out of the 12, only 2 survived, which is Joshua and Caleb. Why? Because they had a different attitude. So what am I simply trying to put across? Number one, Moses was chosen as a deliverer. He rescued the Israelites from the state of physical bondage, or rather physical chains. He rescued them, but as the people were going, their mentality didn't change. They were going into a state of freedom, but their mindset was still in slavery. That was a challenge. So what did God do? He decided to kill the entire generation. A journey that was supposed to take 40 days took 40 years, because 40 days meant 1 year. They were busy rounding, moving around. 1 year, a day meant 1 year, 2 days meant 2 years, until 40 days, which is 40 days by 1 year, which means 40 years. And the generation was killed. Let us now look at the time at which a freedom fighter was then chosen. Deuteronomy 31, verse 7. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, "Be strong and courageous, for you must go with these people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as inheritance." I'm not talking about leadership today, but we can notice that basically Moses had to transfer authority before dying. And like most of the African countries where um people prefer appointing their successors after death. In fact, they don't even wish to give power until they just decide to die. But that's a topic for another day when we talk about leadership. But today I'm simply talking about what it takes to come from a state of physical bondage to a state of freedom. What does it really take? Okay. Now, when you read from Deuteronomy, when you read in Deuteronomy 31 verse 7, you understand that a freedom fighter was picked, which is Joshua. Okay. Now, in chapter 34, Moses saw the land and died. So when you read Deuteronomy 34, because it's the last chapter, you find that basically Moses saw the promised land but couldn't cross over it. Why? Because he also experienced what it meant to be a slave. So God had to deal with the entire generation, the entire mentality, slave mentality, and chose a new generation, which was led by Joshua, so that they can then go into the promised land. Now, let us now understand what it really means to be in freedom. And basically, part of the key concept in freedom is that in freedom, free things stop existing. Free things stop existing. Let us read together Joshua 5 verse 12. It reads, The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. The manna stopped. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate from the produce of Canaan. So they were sitting in the plains of Canaan before really going into Canaan, okay? So they sat at a certain place to eat, okay? And the Bible says the manna ended because when you read immediate after Joshua 5 verse 12, the next verse 13, you find that they made someone who was an angel of God, who basically gave them hope into Jericho. In other words, from this verse, there was now a state of entering into the land of freedom, which was promised. But what does the Bible say before that? The manna stopped. And manna was simply provision. Manna was simply food provided by God. In other words, when God is about to take you in a land of freedom, He stopped providing. Because He stopped providing, what then happens? You eat your produce. Three things stop. You eat what you produce. Let us read together again. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate from the produce of Canaan. The produce of Canaan, meaning what was produced in Canaan, not what God gave to them. Because manna was given by God. So basically, that stops. Verse 16, you understand that Joshua now was entering into the promised land called Jericho, and further then expanded to other lands, and then took over Canaan, which is basically the promised land, Israel. Very important. So let me try to summarize. God chooses a deliverer to rescue people from the state of physical bondage. In our case as Zambia, we can relate this to His Excellency Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, who rescued us from physical bondage. And it is the same scenario. When you understand in those days, there was no hunger, the things like FISIP. And by the way, God only gives 40 years to change the mentality. If people don't change the mentality within 40 years of being rescued from physical bondage, He then wipes away the entire generation. This is what happened to the people of Israel. The entire generation had to wipe. The entire generation had to wipe. Okay? And Zambia will basically surpass the 40 years of being provided for. 40 years of being provided for. We have now entered into a state of freedom. The entire 40 years is a state of deliverance. And that is why things during that period are handouts. For example, remember during Kaunda's time, I wasn't there, but I could remember that things were cheap. Dollar was basically going at the same ranges as kwacha. Okay, there was FISIP, fertilizers were given, people just had to farm. Okay, and this continued even during Chiruba, same thing. It went on even during Rupia Banda. Things were just like that. During Manawasa, provision was there. Okay, it went on for about a period of 40 years. After the 40 years, you begin to face struggles. Why? Because after 40 years, you now go into a state of freedom. In a state of freedom, citizens, basically, the rescued, have to begin thinking of how themselves they can produce. And this is basically the battle that Zambia is going on now. That is what's happening in Zambia. It's like the people are used to being given handouts, but basically the years that we're in, because we're in the 60s, which is more than 40 years, we're in a state of freedom where we need to provide for ourselves. And if in the next 40 years we don't basically see how Zambia can become its own provider, then we're likely to experience a state where the colonizer will come back and rule again, not directly, but through investments and these other things. And we've seen it happening. So it is very important that even as citizens, we understand the times we're in and we know what to do, just like the tribe of Issachar. So we're in a state of freedom, a state where people must be independent, where people should think of themselves, where people should produce, where people should not expect handouts from the government. Because in the history of the Israelites, we understand that Israelites were being provided for by the government. Which government? God, who basically was delivering them through Moses, the deliverer, and later appointed a freedom fighter who basically didn't experience the physical oppression, the physical slavery by appointing Joshua. Because Joshua didn't really experience what slavery is. Okay? And because he didn't experience that, meaning his attitude was basically different from those that experienced slavery. Because God is interested in the attitudes as you go to freedom. So this is basically what the country Zambia is going through now. So what am I simply trying to say? What I'm simply trying to say is no matter how we complain, no matter what we do, we're in a state of freedom. And we need a president who is a freedom fighter, a president who basically can't go with the complaints of people, but tell them you must work, you must be producers, you must have reduce importing. Everything should be within the country because the state of provision has gone. This is the state that we are in, and I think basically the current president is doing that, but the pressure seems to be high from the citizens, and basically if not careful, he might as well give up and subject himself to the oppressor. And the oppressor will come here as a way to help. Meanwhile, the country is being sold through investment, through handouts and these other things. And we can't risk seeing that. So this is what I had to research and find out about. Now, let us look at the benefits of oppression. Oppression has a number of benefits, and this is why we struggle to come out of oppression easily. Let's look at the benefits of oppression. Number one, planning is done by the oppressor. Planning is done by the oppressor. Number two, everything is provided by the oppressor. Everything is provided by the oppressor. Number three, thinking is done by the oppressor. Slaves don't think. The oppressor thinks and gives their thoughts to the slaves to do the work and implement. Number four, crisis is felt by the oppressor. Okay? In other words, the slaves don't feel crisis. The oppressor feels the crisis. They feel the impact, and it is them to make the decision. Okay, that is very important to understand. And this is why when people come out of oppression, it becomes very difficult, very, very difficult to really become independent people. It is only until the mind is renewed that is when results begin to come out. And it is only if you understand the times we are in, as I've explained earlier, will you know that this is not the time to complain. Because when I woke up, I almost began to join In fact, I've joined number of times, joining into the conference. No electricity, especially that I'm a student. No electricity, and just as CBU is staff, and you find that you are home, no electricity, you go in camp when it's cold and stuff like that. So I used to join the complaints. I used to join the complaints to say this load shedding, things are expensive, and things like that. Okay, even people are waking, are complaining. You understand? So instead of joining, I began to question myself: why are we experiencing this? Okay, what can I learn from the Bible? And basically, after understanding what it takes to experience freedom, my mind is renewed. From today onwards, I'll never complain. My task is to work, work and work, do whatever it takes, but complaints should not be an issue, because when you complain, simply means you are saying, take us back to slavery. Okay? And we really can't go back to a place that really people fought for in order for us to be where we are today. We can't afford doing that. So let us wake up and work hard. Let us look at the hindrance of oppression on freedom. The hindrance of oppression on freedom. Number one, the oppressed suffer identity crisis. The oppressed suffer identity crisis. In other words, when you come from a state of slavery into a state of freedom, you tend to feel like, you tend to ask yourself, who are you? Okay? You suffer identity crisis. You not understand who you are. You think you can't do anything important, and it becomes a very big challenge. Number two, the oppressed fail to plan. The oppressed fail to plan. Why did they fail to plan? Because they are used to being planned for. This is very important. Number three, the oppressed fail to withstand crisis. Why? Because crisis is felt by the one who governs, and in that case, we are being governed by the oppressor. So therefore, they are not used to a state of crisis. Why? Because they are not used to being independent, they are used to being planned for. Number four, the oppressed fail to take responsibility due to dependency. Very important. This is basically across all countries that were colonized. And this is why the oppressor is coming through debt, is coming through these other things, to the extreme that they're even imposing certain immoral cultures on us. For example, gayism, and you can't do anything because we're not yet in a state of freedom. Our mind is not changed. We can't plan for ourselves. We can't produce for ourselves. We import. The GDP is bad, This is what happens. Number five, the oppressed fail to trust themselves. And it reminds me of, I think Jesus once said that, what to a land when a slave becomes a king? What to a land when a slave becomes a king? Okay. It is very dangerous because, one, a person who thinks like a slave to be a king is very dangerous. Why? Because they can't think of themselves. They can't think for themselves. They want everything to be done for them. They depend on others, and it is a very, very challenging state. And I thought I should raise this so that we understand the times and we know what to do, just like the tribe of Issachar was. This is the message I had for you today. My names are Maluva Mwinilumbwe, and see you in the next one. Peace.